An arrogant millionaire hires a blind housekeeper, unaware of what she's truly capable of. In a moment of desperation, everyone's destiny changes forever. Thomas Bennett contemplated New York City through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse. The morning sun reflected off the glass and steel skyscrapers, creating a spectacle he barely noticed anymore. His thoughts were focused on the problems he faced maintaining his residence to the standards he demanded. He approached the Venetian mirror in the entrance hall, adjusting his Italian silk tie with meticulous precision. At 45, Thomas emanated the aura of power he had carefully cultivated over 2 decades in the financial market. Gray hair at his temples gave him a distinguished air, complementing his angular face and penetrating blue eyes, accustomed to intimidating anyone who dared to contradict him. The penthouse mansion, occupying the entire top floor of the most exclusive building in the Upper East Side, was his pride and status symbol. Each piece had been personally chosen, each detail meticulously planned. But now, for the 5th time that month, he found himself without staff to maintain the standard of excellence he demanded. "Mr. Bennett, the candidate sent by the agency is here," announced Martha, his personal assistant, through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling his irritation grow. The agency had called the day before, insisting they had the perfect candidate for the position. He doubted it. No one seemed to understand his standards of excellence. "Send her up to my office," he responded dryly. Thomas's private office occupied a privileged wing of the penthouse. Dark wood panels lined the walls, contrasting with carefully illuminated contemporary artwork. The door opened, and Martha entered accompanied by the candidate. Thomas, who had his back to the entrance, purposely organizing some papers on his solid mahogany desk, turned around with the bored expression he reserved for these occasions. The sight made him pause for a moment. The first thing he noticed was the white cane. The second was that the woman before him completely contradicted the role she intended to fulfill. Tall, with impeccable posture, she wore a simple but elegant suit. Her brown hair was tied in a meticulous bun, and her face had a classical delicacy that reminded him of old Parisian photographs. "Amelie Lambert, Mr. Bennett." Martha made the introductions formally. 42 years old, excellent references from her previous work. Thomas ignored the introduction, addressing Martha directly with a tone of derision. "A blind housekeeper? Is this some kind of bad joke?" "With all due respect, Mr. Bennett," Amelie intervened, her melodious voice carrying a soft French accent. "My visual condition does not interfere with my ability to perform exceptional work. The loss of sight has developed my other senses in extraordinary ways." "Really?" Thomas asked with evident sarcasm. "And how do you plan to clean without knocking anything over? This room alone contains pieces worth more than many people earn in a lifetime." Amelie moved her head slightly, as if listening to the environment. "By the echo and acoustics, I can determine the exact dimensions of this room. I smell the scent of the wood panels, probably antique oak. The orchid fragrance comes from my right, approximately 2 meters away. There's a modern sculpture near the window, from the sound the air conditioning makes as it circulates around it. The floor is Italian marble. I can feel its characteristic texture under my feet." Thomas raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Each observation was correct. "And how will I know you won't break anything while cleaning?" "Spatial memory, Mr. Bennett. If you or Martha show me the location of each object once, I create a mental map of the environment. Besides, my touch is extremely developed. I can feel the smallest particle of dust or dirt. As for cleaning itself, I've developed my own techniques that allow me to be even more meticulous than a person with sight." "Why would someone with your sensory abilities want a housekeeper job?" Thomas asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming skepticism. "Because I believe any honest work has dignity, Mr. Bennett. And because I insist on being exceptional in everything I set out to do." The response caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of philosophy he expected to hear from a housekeeper candidate. There was something more to this woman, something he couldn't decipher. Her eyes, though unfocused, conveyed a disturbing intensity. "1-week trial," he finally declared. "Martha, show her all the premises. And prepare the probationary period contract." As the two women withdrew, Thomas observed the way Amelie moved. Each step was precise, studied, as if she had absolute awareness of her body in space. Her cane barely touched the ground, serving more as an extension of her senses than as support. Thomas turned his attention back to the window, observing the city below. In 2 decades building his financial empire, he had learned to trust his instincts. And something in his instincts said that Amelie Lambert wasn't just a blind housekeeper looking for work. What he couldn't imagine was that this job interview would be the first chapter of a story that would completely transform his life. Amelie's first week of work began on a cold October Monday. Thomas discreetly observed through the security cameras as she familiarized herself with the mansion. Martha had dedicated the entire Sunday showing each room, each object, every particularity of the penthouse. The businessman expected to find hesitation, insecurity, perhaps even some accidents. But what he saw left him intrigued. Amelie moved through the space as if she could see. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost choreographed. Her delicate hands glided over surfaces with extraordinary sensitivity, detecting the slightest imperfection. In the library, while cleaning the mahogany shelves, she suddenly stopped. "Mr. Bennett," she called out loud, knowing he usually worked in his office at that hour. "There's a problem with one of your books." Thomas, who was watching everything on his computer screen, went to the library. "What problem?" "Third shelf, 4th position from right to left. The book is emitting a characteristic smell of mold. Moisture must have penetrated through the window during the last storm." He picked up the indicated book, a rare first edition. Upon opening it, he found small spots of mold on the final pages, still imperceptible to the naked eye. If not treated quickly, they would compromise the entire work. "How did you know?" "Smell," she explained, continuing her work. "Blind people develop extraordinary olfactory sensitivity. Mold has a specific aroma, even in its initial stage." In the days that followed, Thomas noticed other intriguing details. Amelie always knew when flowers needed to be replaced, even before they showed visible signs of deterioration. She detected when the heater's temperature was a few degrees above or below ideal. On one occasion, she alerted about a leak in the kitchen plumbing, noticing a subtle change in the sound of running water. On a particularly busy morning, Thomas was preparing for an important meeting when he spilled coffee on his favorite tie. He cursed loudly, knowing he didn't have time to change clothes. "Allow me." Amelie appeared silently with a small emergency kit. Her hands worked with surgical precision, applying a special solution. In minutes, the stain had completely disappeared. "Where did you learn that?" "When you lose one sense, Mr. Bennett, you learn to compensate in various ways. Knowledge about chemical products and their reactions becomes vital." There was something in the way she spoke, a depth of knowledge that seemed to go far beyond what was necessary for her role. And then there were her moments of distraction, rare but revealing. One afternoon, Thomas found her in the music room, her fingers sliding softly over the Steinway piano keys without producing sound. Her face had a distant, almost painful expression. "Do you play piano?" he asked, startling her. "Not anymore," she replied simply, returning to work. At the end of that first week, Thomas found himself facing a decision that was already made before he even realized it. He called Amelie to his office. "Your trial period is over," he announced formally. "I understand," she responded, maintaining her serene posture. "Should I collect my things?" "No. I want you to sign a permanent contract. Your work is satisfactory." A small smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "Satisfactory is quite a compliment coming from you, from what I've heard." Thomas found himself smiling too, something rare in his repertoire of expressions. "Martha will prepare the contract. You can return to work." When she left, Thomas remained thoughtful. In 1 week, Amelie had become an indispensable presence in his house, bringing an order and harmony that went beyond simple cleaning and organization. But there were mysteries in that woman that intrigued him more and more. What he didn't know yet was that the greatest of these mysteries was about to reveal itself in a way that would forever change his perspective on value, dignity, and purpose. The discovery happened on a November night when New York was hit by an unexpected storm. Thomas was in his office, reviewing important documents, when a particularly strong thunder made the power fluctuate. The next moment, he heard a muffled scream coming from the library. He found Amelie kneeling on the floor, trembling. One of the sculptures had fallen during the power fluctuation, and she was trying to collect the fragments with shaking hands. But it wasn't the broken sculpture that caught his attention. It was the way Amelie repeatedly murmured, "I can't lose anyone else, not again." "Amelie?" Thomas approached cautiously. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head negatively, but her hands continued trembling. Thomas noticed something he had never seen before, a long scar on the side of her neck, partially hidden by her blouse collar. "The noise," she explained in a trembling voice. "It reminded me of that night." "What night?" For a long moment, only the sound of rain filled the silence. When Amelie finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of painful memories. "I was chief surgeon of the trauma department at New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of the youngest to reach that position. That night, we were in the middle of a delicate heart surgery on a 6-year-old girl when the fire started." Thomas sat slowly in a nearby armchair, his mind processing the unexpected revelation. Protocol required immediate evacuation, but the girl's chest was open. Moving her would mean certain death. Smoke began to invade the operating room. My team was forced to evacuate, but I couldn't abandon her. Amelie took a deep breath, her fingers unconsciously touching the scar on her neck. I continued operating while the fire approached. The heat was unbearable. The toxic smoke burned my eyes, but I needed to finish. When I finally closed the last stitch, the flames were already consuming part of the room. I covered the girl with my own body while the firefighters arrived. "You saved her life," Thomas murmured. "Yes, Sarah is alive and healthy today, but the price was high. Prolonged exposure to heat and chemical smoke caused irreversible damage to my eyes." When I woke up in the hospital days later, the world was dark. Thomas looked at Amelie's hands, now understanding her extraordinary precision. "That's why your movements are so surgical. 15 years of medical training don't disappear with vision," she said with a sad smile. "I learned to adapt my skills. The sensitivity in my hands, the ability to detect anomalies by touch and smell, the precision in movements. They're all tools I used in medicine. But why work as a housekeeper? With your experience, you could teach, do consulting." Amelie stood up, regaining her usual posture. "After the accident, many people tried to convince me to follow those paths. But I needed to prove something to myself, that I could still be useful, be excellent at something, even if completely different from what I did before. Medicine taught me that there is no small work when it comes to caring for something or someone." A new thunder shook the building, but this time Amelie didn't tremble. It was as if sharing her story had freed something inside her. Thomas watched as she bent down again to collect the sculpture fragments, her movements regaining their usual precision. He now saw not just an exceptionally competent housekeeper, but a woman of extraordinary courage who had sacrificed everything to save a life. And at that moment, something fundamentally changed in the way Thomas saw the world. All his material achievements, his entire financial empire, suddenly seemed small compared to this woman's act of bravery who now cleaned his house. What he still didn't know was that fate had one more twist prepared, one that would offer the chance to repay Amelie's sacrifice in a way neither of them could imagine. The revelation about Amelie's past triggered an obsession in Thomas Bennett. For weeks, he immersed himself in research about innovative treatments for acquired blindness. His corporate world connections opened doors to information about yet unpublished research, experimental procedures, scientific advances in testing phases. In his office at Bennett Investments, piles of medical reports mixed with financial contracts. His executive assistant noticed that for the first time in years, he was canceling meetings to participate in video conferences with ophthalmology specialists from around the world. One December afternoon, as snow fell over Manhattan, Thomas received the call he had been waiting for. Dr. Michael Chun, chief researcher at the Singapore Ocular Bioengineering Institute, had promising news. "Mr. Bennett, we've analyzed the case you sent us. The described damage is similar to the cases we're treating in our research. Our neural regeneration technique using modified stem cells has shown extraordinary results in patients with similar conditions." Thomas felt his heart race. "What's the success rate?" "Of the 12 patients in the test group, 8 recovered vision completely. 2 obtained partial recovery. Only 2 didn't respond to the treatment." "And the risks?" "Like any experimental procedure, there are risks. The most significant is the possibility of scar tissue formation that could cause chronic pain. But we've developed rigorous protocols to minimize these complications." Thomas scheduled an in-person meeting with Dr. Chun for the following week. The doctor would fly specially to New York to examine Amelie, if she accepted. This was the part that worried him most. That night, Thomas found Amelie in the library, where she was organizing his collection of first editions. The aroma of lemon oil used to treat the leather bindings filled the environment. "Amelie, I need to talk to you." She stopped her work, turning in his direction. "Your voice is tense, Mr. Bennett. Has something happened?" "I found a possibility of treatment for your vision." The silence that followed was dense. Amelie's hands, normally so steady, trembled slightly. "It's an experimental procedure in Singapore. Modified stem cells for neural regeneration. The preliminary results are promising." "Why did you do this?" Her voice was just a whisper. "Because you deserve a second chance. Because your talent as a surgeon is too precious to be lost." Amelie stood up, her movements for the first time seeming uncertain. "You don't understand. I spent years accepting my condition, building a new life, finding purpose in other ways. And if you could have your old life back?" "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Afraid of nurturing hopes and failing. Afraid of going through everything again, the darkness, the adaptation, the reconstruction." Thomas approached, resisting the urge to touch her arm. "The doctor in charge will come to New York next week. Just talk to him. You don't need to make any decision now." Amelie nodded slowly. "Why are you doing this for me?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Why was he so invested in her recovery? The answer came before he could filter it. "Because you taught me something about courage and dignity that all my money could never buy." A soft smile appeared on Amelie's lips. "I never imagined that one day Thomas Bennett, Wall Street's most ruthless businessman, would become my advocate." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. The man who had interviewed her with such skepticism months ago was now moving heaven and earth to help her. But the biggest surprises were still to come, stored in the developments that fate was preparing for both of them. The New York Medical Center had become a milestone in Thomas Bennett's life. Not just because of the historic procedure that was about to happen, but because every minute of waiting made him realize how important Amelie had become in his life. The operating room was equipped with cutting-edge technology. Thomas had spared no effort or resources to ensure the best. Seeing Amelie being prepared for surgery awakened in him an anxiety he hadn't felt in a long time. "I still can't believe you mobilized all this," Amelie commented when he came in to see her before the procedure. Her subtle perfume filled the environment, mixing with the antiseptic aroma of the hospital. "It couldn't be any different," Thomas responded, his voice softer than usual. He approached the stretcher, hesitating for a moment before holding her hand. Amelie intertwined her fingers with his, a gesture that made Thomas's heart race. "You're nervous. I can feel your pulse. And you're perfectly calm. Years of practice on the other side of the operating table." She smiled. "But having you here helps." A nurse entered to administer the pre-anesthesia. Thomas felt Amelie's hands slightly squeeze his. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised, and for the first time in years, his voice betrayed emotion. The 8 hours of surgery seemed endless. Thomas refused to leave the waiting room, reliving every moment of the past months. How had that woman transformed his life? How had her silent presence filled a void he didn't even know existed? The post-operative recovery in Thomas's penthouse created an unexpected intimacy between them. He spent hours in Amelie's room, talking, discovering a connection that went far beyond their social or professional positions. Thomas told her about the challenges of raising Emma alone after his wife's premature death, about the pressures of building a financial empire, but he wanted to know more and more about her. "Tell me about France," he asked one night, sitting near her bed. Amélie smiled, even with bandaged eyes. "Paris in autumn, the golden leaves in the Luxembourg gardens, the aroma of coffee and croissants in the morning. I've never seen Paris like that. Because you only know business Paris. You need to see the city through the eyes of someone who loves it. Maybe you can show me someday." The words escaped before he could contain them. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken possibilities. Amélie reached out, finding his face with delicate fingers. Thomas closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the touch. On the morning of removing the bandages, the tension was palpable. Dr. Chun conducted the process with meticulous precision, but Thomas could only focus on Amélie, on how her presence had changed his entire world. "Ready?" Dr. Chun asked softly. Amélie nodded. Thomas held her hand, as he had done so many times in recent weeks. The moment she opened her eyes would forever be etched in Thomas's memory. Tears ran down her face as she absorbed the soft light, the shapes, the colors. Then her eyes found his for the first time. "You have kind eyes," she whispered, behind all that tough businessman pose. Thomas felt his heart stop for a moment. The way she looked at him, as if seeing not just his appearance but his soul, left him speechless. Something had fundamentally changed between them, a transformation as profound as Amélie's own recovery of sight. The days that followed brought a new dynamic to the mansion. Amélie needed to gradually readapt to the visual world, and Thomas reorganized his schedule to be more present. Her recovery coincided with Emma's school holidays, who spent more time at home than usual. Emma, at 15, had inherited her father's intelligence and her late mother's sensitivity. Initially curious about the housekeeper who now occupied the main guest room, she soon developed a deep admiration for Amélie. "How did you manage to do everything without seeing?" Emma asked one afternoon, while helping Amélie exercise her vision by organizing books by color. "Our other senses are extraordinary when we give them the chance," Amélie replied. "Like now, even though I can see, I still smell the unique aroma of each book, the different texture of each page." Thomas observed these interactions from the door, without interfering. It was as if a missing piece of his family had finally found its place. The visual rehabilitation sessions became special moments. Emma frequently read aloud to Amélie, helping her reconnect printed letters with words. Thomas would find them laughing at shared stories, as if they had always been part of each other's lives. One night, after Emma left for the movies, Thomas found Amélie in the library, where everything had begun. "Your daughter is extraordinary," she commented, her eyes now able to appreciate the artwork she previously knew only by touch. "She adores you." Thomas approached, stopping beside her in front of the window. "I've never seen her connect with someone like this since she lost her mother. Children have an incredible capacity to see beyond appearances." Amélie turned to him, something that some adults take time to learn. Thomas felt the weight of those words. "Like me. You learn," she smiled, gently touching his face. "And now I can see in your eyes every time you learn something new." The moment was interrupted by the phone ringing. It was the police. Thomas's heart raced. Emma had been in an accident. A chain collision on Fifth Avenue, caused by a drunk driver, involved 5 vehicles. The car Emma was in was crushed between an SUV and a truck. Thomas ran through the hospital corridors, his world falling apart. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. Severe abdominal trauma, internal bleeding, liver damage. They needed to operate immediately, but the chances were minimal. "We don't have a specialized vascular trauma surgeon available," the emergency chief explained. "The closest one is an hour away." "Emma doesn't have an hour," Thomas responded, his voice breaking. That's when Amélie entered the emergency room. Her newly recovered eyes quickly assessed the monitors and exams. "I'll do the surgery." Everyone turned to her. Dr. Lambert, the emergency chief, recognized. "But your license?" "My license is suspended, not revoked. In emergency situations, the law allows me to act. And we don't have time for bureaucratic discussions." Amelie turned to Thomas, her eyes meeting his with fierce intensity. "Trust me." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "Do whatever she says." The operating room transformed instantly. Amelie commanded the team with natural authority, as if she had never left the surgical center. Her hands, which for months had cleaned Thomas's mansion, now danced with millimetric precision over Emma's fragile body. "Vascular clamp," she ordered. "We need to contain the bleeding before repairing the liver damage." The following hours were a test of endurance and skill. Amelie worked tirelessly, her newly healed eyes focused on saving the life of the girl who, unknowingly, had connected her destiny to hers. In the waiting room, Thomas alternated between silent prayers and moments of despair. That's when Martha arrived with a folder. "Mr. Bennett, I found something you need to see." Inside the folder were old news reports. The photo showed Amelie receiving a Medical Excellence Award. The headline read, "Dr. Amelie Lambert, youngest trauma chief to successfully perform pediatric cardiac surgery in emergency situation." 5 hours later, Amelie emerged from the operating room. Her face showed exhaustion, but her eyes sparkled. "She'll live," she announced. "The damage was extensive, but we managed to repair everything. Emma is strong, Thomas." Like her father, Thomas couldn't hold back the tears. He hugged Amelie tightly, not caring who might see. "You saved my daughter," he whispered, "just like you saved that girl in the fire. The difference is that this time I can see the result of my work," she responded, also crying. "And see you." Days later, when Emma was out of danger, Thomas found Amelie in the hospital garden. The evening sun bathed her face, highlighting the beauty he had always known existed, even when he couldn't see. "The hospital board wants to offer me my old position back," she said, "with a promotion. And will you accept?" Amelie smiled, that smile that had illuminated his darkest days. "Only if you promise you won't need a housekeeper to see me every day." Thomas held her hands, feeling as if he could finally see clearly for the first time in his life. "I think we can find other reasons to see each other," he responded before kissing her. In the hospital window, Emma watched the scene with a smile. Sometimes, she thought, you need to lose something precious to find something even more valuable. And sometimes, you need to become blind to really start seeing. If you enjoyed the story, don't miss the next ones appearing on your screen. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. See you next time.